It is now 9 o'clock, and we will go ahead and get started with our 2020 Spring Professional Development Conference. First, I just wanted to introduce myself. Most of you know me as Constance Willoughby. I am the Director of Conferences and Scholarships here at ACI. If you can't hear me, can you just go ahead and type in the chat box the school that you're representing? I just want to make sure that everyone can hear me clearly and okay. Excellent. All right, so we do appreciate you guys for being able to join us online because of the COVID-19 restrictions. You know that we had to migrate our in-person conference to an online experience. And so most of you know that we are offering 2 sessions for each of 3 different areas of interest, including advancement, finance, and student engagement. And during the session, if you do have any questions, please go ahead and feel free to type them in the available chat box, and the presenter will respond accordingly. And our first session of the day is entitled Making the Decision to Go Virtual, Fundraising and Event Planning During a Global Pandemic. The presenter for this session is Amy Schiffman, who is the founder and principal of Evolve Giving Group. So thanks for joining us, Amy. You can go ahead and take over.
Hi, everyone. Good morning. Thank you for being here. And if you wouldn't mind also typing into the chat box what your role is at your university or college, that would be fantastic. I'm trying to get a sense of, I know there are some dedicated portfolios around development and fundraising, and others of you play multiple roles. It would just be great to get a sense of, a little greater sense of who's in the room. Great, I see some of that. We're gonna try and accomplish 2 things this morning. I want to talk about both virtual event fundraising, whether or not that's the right move for you, but I also wanna cover some broader advancement questions around what's happening with fundraising in the world right now, specifically in the higher ed world, and what are the steps that we can or should be taking in order to bring our donors as close as possible. And so I'm looking to you to not only, I know it's hard when we're in a big group to really create an atmosphere of discussion and conversation, but I'm really looking to you to post in the chat box as much as you're willing about reactions you're having to what I'm saying, questions that you have, but even suggestions for your peers. I think we have a lot of fantastic knowledge on this Zoom right now. And so I think everyone's wondering what everybody else is doing with regard to fundraising. So please don't be shy. And again, I enjoy the conversation that comes from competing opinions. And so if I say something that doesn't sound right to you, tell me, because let's hash it out. I'm going to share my screen. That's always challenge number 1. And how's that looking? Can you just give me a thumbs up if all good? Okay. Here's sort of my plan for this morning. And by the way, I've done quite a few webinars over the course of this pandemic, and I've been kicked out of them a few times in the middle of speaking. So what I want to pledge to you is that I'm going to come back. So if you stick with me, I promise I will get back in the room. I have 4 people in my house who are also trying to work on video right now, and sometimes we compete with each other. I'm glad 2 of those people in my house are sleeping right now, so maybe I've got like a 50% competition rate from the teenagers. So again, here's my goal for us this morning in a very short time. I'm assuming that you signed up for this session because you're weighing your options. Maybe you typically are offering some event. And I was going to say this summer, but the truth is I'm getting questions from my clients, and part of what I do, I'll sort of talk about myself along the way. I think you can read my bio. You can go to evolvegivinggroup.com if you want to learn more about me or what my team does. But we serve nonprofits of all shapes and sizes across North America. We're based in Chicago, but we do a lot of work outside of Illinois. And I'm getting question, and mostly we do fundraising. We do fundraising, board development, strategic planning, talent recruitment. And I get a lot of questions from clients, not only about, well, this is what we were going to do this spring or summer, but also what we thought was safe in terms of postponing events until the fall or maybe even early winter now does not seem as safe as it did a couple of months ago when we first started postponing events. So we're really talking about whether or not it's a safe thing to plan for in-person events all the way through this into the spring of 2021, which seems crazy and scary, but that's the world that we're in. It's difficult to commit to that right now. And so anything that you, when you're considering a large group event, anything that you were going to be doing this year, but what I mean by year is like from now until a year from now, is sort of up for conversation, is up for debate as to whether or not it's smart to plan for any large-ish group in the next year. And so that's part of what I want to think about with you today is, should you go virtual? Does your event lend itself to a virtual environment? If not, what are your options? We definitely need to think about the return on investment here. And again, I'd like to touch on some broader thoughts about donors and fundraising in general. And I'm going to start there. I will, from time to time, stop and find out whether or not we have any questions in the chat box. And I might just look to Constance to tell me that, since it's hard for me to go back and forth. Let's start with stepping toward the challenge. So I think the first couple of months, I don't know about you, but everything felt very, people felt nervous. It felt sort of scary to think about soliciting major gifts in March and April, and maybe even the beginning of May. And so what we were talking to our clients about was just a lot of really strong donor communication work. Understanding that donors have a stake in how we respond to the crisis, and that no news is not necessarily good news, so that the lack of response, because we were sort of working in shock mode for the first several weeks, and it was hard to get stuff out. The fundraising professionals, the deans, anyone that I was talking to sort of seemed sidelined by the logistics of needing to move all of our work from home, really very legitimately dealing with the logistics of closing campuses and moving to virtual was a huge undertaking. And so maybe you got pulled into that, and understandably so. It was hard to get our heads around donor cultivation and donor stewardship when we were dealing with the day-to-day crisis emergency of the moment. I hope for you that you have gotten past that somewhat, that we have gotten out of the emergency of the moment. Many of us have recovered from the shock of having to move our work virtually or from home. And now I hope, and if you're not already there, then now's the time to get there, and it's okay. We forgive you. A lot's been going on in the world, but really rethinking and sort of rewriting your donor communications plan and that strategy. What does that look like? Are people hearing from you consistently? Are you ensuring that your donors, and not just your families, your students in your student families, understanding that there's a plan, but reaching out to the donors to say, here's what we're doing, here's what we've done so far, and here's our plan for the future. And even if you don't know what you're doing, I know some schools have not decided 100%, are we virtual, are we in person, are we hybrid, whatever that is for you, to keep laying out those scenarios to your donors and to allow them to understand what you're doing. I happen to have a senior in a high school, so I'm getting a lot of, she's going, I think, to University of Denver next year, and I'm getting tons of communications from their admissions office. Not with a ton of answers, by the way, but just with scenarios. And I know that some of those are coming from the advancement office. They're seeing me as a potential donor, as a parent for the future. And so they want to be sure that I'm hearing all potential strategies and scenarios. I'm assuming that you are doing some of that, but I want to be sure that we are doing some of that from the donor perspective. and be as clear as we can about timing. Again, if you don't know, it's okay to say you don't know, but by when will you be making those decisions? What is it that your donors should know about your plans? And I know that, again, for instance, because I'm in this world right now, I know that Denver has said that by July 15th, they will have a final decision about class structure, course structure, living structure for next year. That feels kind of late to us as a parent, but that's the final deadline. And so now I understand that. And we keep talking about July 15th in our family. What do your donors know about how you will proceeding, and how are you communicating with them? There are opportunities to communicate with a mass market with every donor in your database. And then there are opportunities to speak to your major donors in a much more personalized way. So I hope you are also doing that. What we learned about, I, by the way, started my firm, which back then was Giving Tree Associates, in 2008, sort of in the midst of our last, economic decline. And what we learned during that time was that organizations that really made it through a very tough, challenging time, the ones that withstood the crisis, were those who had very, very detailed, specific donor stewardship plans that reached out when they think about that giving pyramid, that spend a lot of time speaking one-on-one with those at the top of the giving pyramid, that though keeping those donors close, and that even though this maybe wasn't a time for them to maybe be making their most transformational gifts to your school, if those donors feel informed and that they are valued regardless of whether they're making transformational or major gifts right now, that we're just sticking in there with them, and that when their portfolios recover, we are interested in talking about opportunities and partnerships. Those are the organizations that did well. Those are the organizations that felt like they made it through the storm. And so if you can think about how you can utilize your team in order to be able to do that, even working from home, we cannot be taking people like we did in 2000, from 2008 to 2012, maybe for coffee and doing all those face-to-face cultivation or stewardship moves. But what can you be doing right now? What we do know about donors is that they are mostly home. Some have gone back to work. Depending where you are in the world, but we're all in Illinois. So Illinois is still fairly tightly sheltered or shut down in some way, shape, or form. So people are available for those conversations. I'm speaking to my clients who say, yes, every time I ask for a Zoom call with this donor who typically was extremely hard to reach, I actually can get him or her on the phone, or I can get them on Zoom right now. Take advantage of the fact that people are more available than they ever were and maybe ever will be. And if you can make a list of your top 20 to 30 donors, maybe for some of us it's more than that, but at least with your top 30 is kind of the number that I'm working with my clients. And be sure that there is an intentional plan to outreach to them. Not, if I remember it, but you've got a spreadsheet or you're using your database to really help you achieve that ideal moves management type of contact, these touch points, that some of which may be via email, some of which may be via Zoom or phone call. And some of them might not even come from you. Maybe your chancellor or your dean are helping you to make these outreach phone calls. Maybe your board of directors is really engaged and involved, which would be ideal, by the way, to help you reach those top 30 donors. But that group needs to hear from us consistently. And by consistently, I mean every few weeks in a personal way, in order to get us through this time. Your board of directors or your board of governors or your board of trustees, whatever you're calling that group, they also need to be updated on a very frequent basis. Every 2 to 3 weeks, someone from advancement or your dean, your chancellor should be reaching out to that group to give them a sense of what's going on. Because if you're not updating, then it's hard for you as the advancement person or one of the advancement people to utilize that group in outreach, in cultivation, in stewardship contacts with your donors. And when you look at that list of your top 30, be thinking about who, assuming that you know people on that list, or someone on your team knows people on that list, or someone on your board knows that list. Who are the people who respond well in a crisis? Who are the people that you can go to or you've gone to in the past when you need something quickly, or when there's a sense of urgency? So I would continue filtering that list and picking out those people who might help you with that emergency relief fund that you're creating for students who are having a hard time coming back to school in the fall, who are questioning whether it's worth it to come back at full pay when there's the prospect of being a student virtually. I mean, these are all the questions. And so if you have additional dollars to be able to offer to students and families because there are some donors who are stepping up, that's the kind of role that some of those donors who like to be the hero, who like to save the day, they may want to play. They may want to partner with you. So it's something to be thinking about. Again, constantly walking through that list. We're in big trouble. And I know I don't have to tell you this, but I'm going to say it anyway. We're in big trouble if our top donors don't continue supporting us, and if we don't continue asking them. If we move into the background and decide that they have greater philanthropic priorities than us, that they are supporting other types of institutions given what's going on in the world, and that we may not be a priority, and so we assume that we should back off, we're making a decision for them. I would not do that. I think you want to keep them engaged. You want to give them the opportunity to make you a philanthropic priority. If they believed in you and the work that you're doing in your school before, they likely believe in it now, and we should not be assuming that we've moved down the list. Constance, any questions so far before I move on?
Not yet. Okay,
great. So let's move into talking about events, and I promise we'll continue talking about fundraising in general, but and if we have time as we move on and there aren't that many questions, I'm going to come back to some of these slides and show you some examples of websites that I do think do a good job of expressing these options or taking these options digital. So what is it that we're dealing right now? There's the obvious option of canceling whatever it was you were going to do. And at the beginning, people were not only, or institutions were not only canceling events, but they were also canceling mailings that they were going to do. I know even what's been going on in the world of racial justice more recently, I have some clients that were going to launch campaigns, who are going to launch mailings or spring appeals, who didn't over the past couple weeks because they wanted to be sensitive and not sound tone deaf to what's going on in the world. So it may be that you've already canceled or postponed something that you were going to launch in June and you're waiting because it was originally scheduled for March. So the question now is, does it make sense, especially for an event, for you to cancel altogether versus consider your other options? And those other options are to go dinnerless or go eventless, which is basically holding an event. Any dinnerless dinner is really about a website, is really about putting up a fundraising page instead. That is different than a virtual event, by the way. And the way that I'm distinguishing between the two is whether or not there's some live aspect to what you're doing. There's some virtual event that is actually happening beyond what's on a web page that is helping you to raise money. So again, the option to cancel is there, and it's not something that you should take lightly. It's not something that we should write off. For many organizations that we have worked with, we have actually recommended that they not go virtual and that they not even go eventless or dinnerless, but that they instead reach out to their major donors who may typically give via this event and simply create an opportunity to speak face-to-face or Zoom to Zoom about the gift they would typically give. In other words, for some of us, this is an opportunity to stop relying on transactional fundraising, where we have to make an event to a checkbox on your website or a reply card, or or an event sign up, that's the way the gift is made rather than a face-to-face or a one-on-one human interaction. And for some of us, it's almost like what we're going through withdrawal, like, oh, this is how we used to do it. Everything was transactional. And now we're actually forced to develop deeper, more personal relationships with our donors, which is maybe not a bad thing. So I want you to consider the return on investment. Are you able to achieve your fundraising goals without offering a virtual event? Are you able to assign the people who would typically give, especially at the major gift level? Are you able to assign those conversations to yourself and to the professionals and lay leadership on your team and achieve those gifts in a different way? In other words, just by calling and asking people to make a gift to your school, to your institution, rather than to the event. If the answer is yes, I don't recommend you move forward with a virtual event, even though I'm going to spend the whole rest of the session talking about a virtual event, because what you'll see on my next several slides and via our conversation is virtual events are a lot of work. They may cost less than an in-person event, but there's a definite cost to them. And there's a lot of time and energy. We just worked with an organization who put up a virtual event who said that they had 3 people on their team working each of them working the 72 hours before the virtual event. And that doesn't even count the hundreds of hours that went into planning the event and the videos for footage that was not going live. So there's a lot of time and energy that goes into a virtual event to achieve your fundraising goals. And if that time and energy is better spent simply by contacting your major donors and talking to them about what you're doing right now for your students and what the opportunities are for this fall, what you're struggling with, what you're engaging in, and checking in with them to see how they're doing personally. If you can achieve the gift by making that series of phone calls and really deepening your relationship with donors, then maybe you don't need the virtual event. Then maybe canceling is okay. So that's really the key thing I want you to consider. I also, again, the difference between the dinnerless dinner, I mean, certainly you can reschedule and postpone. I was making that recommendation, by the way, several months ago when we all thought that this was going to be over in 3 to 4 months. Now that we're not so sure that's clear, rescheduling also seems risky and may take you into your next fiscal year, which maybe doesn't do you any good. So think about, if you're thinking about rescheduling or postponing, depending on your fiscal year end. If we're on an academic calendar, then most of us are just starting over. If we're on annual calendar, December to January calendar, then pushing us off may take us again into a different fiscal year if you're talking about next year, and that may not help your fundraising goals for this year. So that's the thought about rescheduling or postponing. Dinnerless versus virtual generally entails a different kind of live streaming platform. Again, dinnerless dinners are those that are putting up a web page and asking people to give. And maybe you even have some peer-to-peer fundraising engaged or involved in your dinnerless dinner, but generally there is less need to all tune in on a specific day at a specific time with a dinnerless dinner. And with a virtual event, there seems to be either an event that takes place at a specific time and day, or a series of events throughout the week that may include some education, some fundraising. So that's really what you need to weigh, again, to decide, is this worth it? Is this something I want to do? Can I just put up a web page to achieve some of those gifts and encourage my donors to go to that web page? And it doesn't mean there can't be a lot of great branding and messaging on that page or those set of pages, or do I want to do something that engages and involves people on a deeper level? One more thing to consider, one more set of things to consider when going virtual is, do I have the leadership? Do I have this slide lays out all of the different considerations for my team? The virtual events that I have experienced that are successful are ones where the board or a committee is deeply engaged in the process. So I want you to think about whether or not you have that kind of leadership at your disposal. Will your board engage? Will your board serve as a peer-to-peer fundraiser? Or do you have a lay committee that is willing to serve in that role? Because if not, it is very difficult to achieve your goal with professional efforts alone. And not that those are not Herculean, that it's a huge amount of time and energy, but I know that I, as a professional, am always counting on my lay leadership to partner with me in order to bring people to the table. And this, in this case, we mean bring them to the table virtually, but to serve as table captains, to serve as table host, to serve as team hosts. Maybe you do some kind of a virtual sporting event. Generally, we are looking for people to create their own individual fundraising pages in order for this to work. And I can show you a few of those at the end and give you some of those resources today for you to take a look for yourself. I also think that we may have to rethink our goals. Is your goal, if you're considering whether or not to go virtual, is your goal purely fundraising? Or does this event that you would have held this year also serve, or mostly serve, a friend raising sort of function for the school? So what is it that you're trying to achieve? Because if it's all fundraising, again, there might be another opportunity for you to do that by simply contacting people who would have come or would have given via that event. If it's also outreach and education, that might lend itself nicely to a virtual event or a series of virtual events. And yes, the event budget is still a consideration. You will certainly, or most likely, save money by going virtual because you don't have the event venue rental. And you may not have centerpieces and be sending out hard copy invitations, all the things that tend to cost us a lot of money, entertainment. But you will have other costs, and I'm going to go through those today. Constance, any questions that I should pause to answer? Not yet. Okay. So from here on in, I'm going to make the assumption that you have decided to go virtual. And so I'm going to speak about these steps as if this is what's happening and you've made this decision. The main thing that I want you to understand about fundraising for any event, but especially a virtual event, is that about 95% of the virtual events that I have either experienced or consulted on to date are doing 90% of the fundraising before the event. So I want to be clear with you that if you're thinking that you're going to raise the majority of the dollars during that 45-minute virtual event, and by the way, these are short events, that no one has the patience anymore, especially because there are a lot of virtual events happening now, and I'm noticing they're getting shorter and shorter. People are not going to sit for 2 hours unless you have the most amazing lineup of entertainment and you're bringing some star power to the table and people are waiting to see that person perform or speak or whatever it is. Generally, these are short events, under an hour. So we can't assume that we're going to achieve our fundraising goals via the events. Most of the time that is happening prior to the event. So all that work that I just talked about in terms of reaching out to major donors, you have to do that anyway. In order to achieve those gifts, we want to be at between 80 and at least 80 to 90% of our goal prior to launching. And then you'll pick up some gifts that night or that day or that week. But most of the work happens prior to the event. There's always a question about tickets, whether or not to charge for the event. In the past, you'd never dream of having an event, or maybe you would, but most of us for fundraising events always had a ticket price or always had a table price. What we are encouraging many of our clients, not all of them, but many of our clients, to allow people to come just by signing up. And that, again, if the fundraising is done, most of the fundraising is done in advance. So you open up, you broaden your audience by not requiring a ticket price or them to pay in advance. But it doesn't leave you off the hook for trying to achieve most of those gifts in advance. And it also allows people to make their gifts the night of or the day of. So it's not that there is no fundraising, but and this is really up to you. And if you want to talk about, weigh the pros and cons of this offline with me, I'm happy to talk to you about making a decision about whether or not to charge a ticket price. But lots of organizations, and I'll give you a list of sites that you can go to, and there's some links in the presentation when we send it to you, that you'll see that most of them did not charge people to show up. They either fundraised in advance from those people one-on-one, or some of those people made gifts that night or that day. And there was a lot of peer-to-peer fundraising that happened, again, in advance of the event. And so the link to the event came at no cost to the attendee. So if it's your hope to also use the event to create some buzz about your school, your institution, to get people introduced to you, to get alumni back to the table in a really low risk way, it may be that you don't want to charge a ticket price. Sponsorships are a huge question, a huge issue right now, because most of us who achieved a good portion of our budget via corporate sponsorships are worried about going to companies who may not be doing well right now. I will say this, many of our clients have had continued good success with their sponsor donors, their corporate sponsor donors, but I think you have to offer them a very wide range of options in terms of payment. You have to be super flexible in this regard. So whether that is an auction sponsor in the past or a cash sponsor, corporate sponsor, can you allow them to pay throughout the year? In other words, if they're typically sponsoring at the $5,000 level or the $10,000 level or the $2,500 level, is there an opportunity for them for you to say to them, they have all year to pay that gift, that you'd like them to make the pledge now, but there's a lot of flexibility around payment because maybe they're not doing that well right now. What can you offer them in terms of visibility that maybe you have not offered in the past for corporate sponsors? So getting their name out is especially important to them right now. I would think about what your packages, your corporate sponsorship packages look like. And if you need an example of that, of what does she mean by corporate sponsorship packages, or what should I be offering to corporate sponsors? I'm happy to, if you email me after the session, I'm happy to send you an example of corporate sponsorship benefits. And as much as you can talk about getting their name out there in the world and really thanking them in a public way for their support, they're going to like that right now. They want that recognition and they want to be tied to doing good for a school like yours. So again, thinking about fundraising and recruiting attendees, I would say the number one thing to consider, the best recruiter would be getting back to your board and your lay leadership or your host committee. If you have a group that is willing to create their own through a platform like Classy, and I'll show you some other options in a few minutes, if you have people who are willing to be table or team or sponsors or hosts, that is the best way to get people to come to the table. If every board member can bring 10 people the day of or the week of or the evening of to your event, you are going to have a better opportunity or better chance of kind of filling up your space. And we want lots of names and faces at our virtual events. Please be thinking about your leadership and your staffing, as I referred to before, and we'll talk more about each of these areas. Please be thinking about who can be helpful. You probably need a different level of experience or different kinds of help for a virtual event. We need people who are really tech savvy to help with this than you did in the past if you were doing an in-person event. So think about who's available on your team, who maybe you would not normally access. We're going to talk about platforms in a minute, the two types of platforms you need to engage with in order to do a successful event. Do you have an opportunity to update your website, connect your website? And most of the online fundraising platforms will do this automatically for you. If you're going to put this up yourself and you're not going to use a online fundraising platform, you just have to have the ability to be able to redirect people on your website to the virtual event to create new content. It does take time and energy. And if you don't have someone to do that kind of writing, you might need to hire someone. And last, we're going to be talking about the program. What is it that you're going to do to get people to the table? You now have more competition than you ever did for virtual event headspace, because everyone is doing this. So a month or two ago, it was this new novel thing, and it was cool and fun to think about doing a virtual event. By the time, if you're just thinking about doing this now, by the time you launch, everyone is doing virtual events. So I want you to be thinking about what sets you apart, what your program, what your night of or day of or week of looks like, that gets people to the table, especially if you're thinking of doing something now, like between now and the end of fall, when we're competing with nice weather and more daylight, and people may not want to be inside in front of their computer. Think about that. I also would encourage you to think out of the box. If you typically are doing an evening event, I have a lot of clients that are actually moving to, I have a organization that helps victims of domestic violence that on June 25th is doing a lunch event. And they are actually, anyone who's signed up, they are charging, by the way, for people to come. Their normal ticket price, I think, is $125. For their luncheon, and they are dropping off, yes, dropping off, they're in the Chicago area, lunch for any, it's mostly women who are signing up for this event, for any woman who registers at that $125 level. They are dropping lunch at her home the day of the morning of the event and doing a luncheon. The benefit of that luncheon is that people are, again, mostly home during the day. A lot of people are taking that hour out of their workday to participate. So I just want you to be thinking about what you have available to you in terms of entertainment. Are you going to have a student speaker? Are you going to have students perform? What is it that is going to feel unique about your event so that you can compete in this fairly crowded marketplace? Constance, anything I should be aware of on the chat front?
Yeah, there's just a comment. It's not necessarily a question, and it's from Kristen Egan. She says, one of the organizations that I am on the board of adjusted a $250,000 net event into a non-event. They utilized a 4-pronged communications approach: email message from the president, direct mail, personal follow-up by committee members, and a video appeal. They successfully exceeded their goal this past week.
Woo-woo. Okay, that's great. Yeah. And so what you see, thanks, Kristen. What you see is there's a lot of time and energy that goes into this, even a virtual event. It's still going to be hours and hours of your time, and really deserves its own strategy, which is why we're going to go through all this. I want you to think about it. Speaking of setting a goal and exceeding the goal, which is very exciting, as you consider your goal, I want you and your team to think about the ABCs of event planning, especially virtual event planning. And that's affective, behavioral, and cognitive. How do you want people to feel? What do you want people to do? What is your call to action? Is it just make a gift? What do you want people to do who've already made a gift? So again, be really clear about what your call to action is going to be that night, that day, that week, whatever you're doing. And what do you want people to know about you? What is their takeaway? These are the 3 areas that your committee, your team really needs to dig into to be sure we're on the same page. How do you want people to feel as a result of this event, or coming into this event, or after this event? What do you want them to do? And what is it that you want them to know about you? This will allow you to set goals for the event, which may not only be monetary or financial, right? Maybe it's that we want to find additional people to sit on our committees or get involved, or we're really looking to build our alumni base. And this is our opportunity to do that because our alumni are all over the world or all over the country at this point. And so we're looking to create class captains or table captains based on alumni groupings. I mean, what is it that you want to achieve via this event? This is really the first step in creating your goals. Goal setting, again, should be done at the beginning, just so that your whole team is on the same page about what are we trying to accomplish here. It's generally not just about raising a dollar figure, although that's an important aspect of goal setting. Do you need to rethink that goal? Some organizations I'm seeing are still hitting their goals, and others are falling short or rethinking their goal and saying, you know what, we were planning to raise $250,000 via this event. Now that it's virtual and it's online, and some of those people we are contacting in a totally different, more personal way. And so the goal for our event is now $150,000. I mean, can you and again, this is something that if you need a more individualized approach to thinking about, well, how do I figure that out? I'm happy to talk more about offline, but I want you, one of the ways that you can consider this goal is look at your sponsorship list from last year. Most of us, again, are raising most of the money prior to the event, whether it's in person or virtual. Most of the time we're raising a lot of the money, I should say, before, prior to the event. I know I did as a development director. And so I would want you to think about the people who typically support at the highest level and look at your corporate sponsorship list. What do you know about these companies? Will they still support you? Is this the right time to ask them? Have you been in touch with them? Have you maintained that relationship? If you know already that some of these companies are not going to come in at the same level as they did last year, then that may be a fair reason to reduce the goal. What about your major donors? Is there an opportunity to offer some sort of a challenge grant or a matching gift opportunity in relation to your event? That might be a way to bring to increase the goal, to think about, well, now I have a donor who's going to do a $1 for $1 or a 2-for-1 match for any new gifts that come into the event. Very, very powerful, by the way. There are a lot of studies that show that donors are 80%, I mean, it's almost hard to believe, but 80% more likely to, I think someone needs to mute. 80% more likely to give during a match. It's true. I mean, I don't know that it is true, but it's true that the data says that. So if you've got the opportunity to offer some sort of a challenge or matching opportunity, now would be the time. You also want to take tickets versus donations. We talked about in terms of attendance, but are you planning on charging for the event, or are you offering everybody the opportunity to attend and hoping that people with whom you don't have a relationship quite yet will make a gift during the event, which means you have to offer them constant opportunities to do so. There always has to be a live link, no matter what you're doing. There has to be, like, at the bottom of the video screen, always some kind of a rolling message that is streaming. Every part of the event needs to give people an opportunity to give, if that's part of the goal, if you're counting on night of or day of revenue. So re-put together that budget and think about how you're going to achieve those dollar goals. Second is, and I mentioned this before, leadership is critical. The best events I have seen have strong committees, oftentimes chaired by board members, not necessarily. Maybe that your board doesn't have a lot to do with this, and this is a committee of your board. But think about, if you typically have an honoree, will that person continue to play that role? Or maybe you haven't even asked them yet. The benefit of an honoree-based event is certainly that there's some kind of accountability, or most honorees understand that you are asking them because you hope that they will make a major gift, or a lead gift or a leadership gift, maybe the largest gift they've ever made to your institution via event, and that you're asking them, please be clear with your honorees that you're asking them to reach out to their friends, and that you're asking them to have access, to gain access to their contacts or to their Rolodex. No one uses that word anymore. But I want to be clear about that, because when we ask honorees and then we find out later that they are not comfortable reaching out to their network or giving you access to their contacts, it's a very disappointing environment. And I work with many clients who say, well, what do I do now? So please be clear. If you need a copy or a draft role description for an honoree, that's something I'm happy to share with you. I'm offering you a lot of resources. Just remember what it is that you want and email me, and I'm happy to share them with you afterward. But be clear. And I also have host committee role descriptions as well. I'm a big fan of telling people what their job is, so that there are no disappointments and no miscommunications. What is it that you're asking the host committee to do? In the case of a virtual event, we'd love for them to be table captains or team captains, depending on the type of event you're offering. So what's involved with that? What are you going to set them up with? What tools are you going to give them? What role are you expecting your board of directors to play? both prior to the event and after the event. If there's a lot of education and outreach going on with the event and you're not doing fundraising that day or that evening, that this is really a cultivation or a stewardship event, who's in charge of following up with the donors? Maybe you're considering a parlor meeting or some sort of smaller kind of event that's now going virtual, which is a small but mighty 20 people. Having 20 of the right people on a Zoom call can be transformational for your campaign. And so what is the follow-up plan? The most important piece of a parlor meeting is the follow-up, is making sure you have the right people on the screen hearing your message, hearing from students, hearing from alumni, and from your leadership, but also what happens after. If there's not a good follow-up plan, it's really a waste of an event. So what role will your board or your committee play in contacting the people who showed up if you're not doing fundraising during the event? Again, I'm going to come back to some of these links and I'll share them with you live, just so that you can see what table captains look like. But if you've been on any of the Give Smart or the Classy, you'll see that there's an opportunity to create your own page. And you've seen this for a lot of the sporting events where people can set their own goals and then work to achieve those goals. And that's live the whole time. So it gets updated in real time for your event. Speaking of real time, we need two types of platforms to do a live fundraising event or to do a virtual fundraising event. The first is live streaming. So here are some options for you: Zoom, YouTube Live, Vimeo Live. Generally, these are free. Generally, they're free. And why I say generally is that you may need to upgrade, which costs you money, but not a lot of it, in order to accommodate the number of people who may tune into your event. So we need both a live streaming platform and a fundraising platform. I suggest, and what I'm seeing is that there are for a virtual event, there is some live component to that event, but not everything is live. So most of the time we have something coming live. Maybe that's the honoree coming live. Maybe that's the MC for the event that is coming. Some portion of that event is live. Maybe it's your chancellor or dean. Maybe it's a student presentation or two. We're not generally seeing the whole event come to us live. Not always true for some of the smaller events, yes, if you're just doing a Zoom with a live speaker. But for a gala type event, I generally see some pre-recorded video and maybe a lot of pre-recorded video that's used just in case the person who's supposed to be live streaming suddenly disappears, that the Ethernet or whatever connection is not strong. So you want to have as much backup as you can just in case something goes wrong. I do recommend, however, that some portion of the event is live. It creates excitement, it creates momentum. People can tell that it's live, and they have an opportunity to engage either by giving or chatting or commenting, and that's where people feel like your event is interactive. Otherwise, I could watch a video anytime. I don't feel compelled to come on. The group mentality helps us fundraise that evening. And the group mentality is driven by some live aspect to your event. Again, whether it's entertainment, speakers, whatever it is, that's what we want to use to drive people to coming and showing up. And the more people, the more momentum, the more excitement, and the more opportunity to give. Again, think about what portion of your program is going to be offered live and what is going to be accomplished via video. Do you have speakers? Do you have entertainment? Are you really talking your case for support? Is your mission clear? So most of us are going to want to utilize some students or student groups in order to tell that story. After all, that's what we do. That's what our mission is. So if you can pre-record that, great. If you want to both pre-record and offer live being the preference, even better. And then you always have that pre-recorded video as a backup if you have a technology glitch, which happens to the best of us. Day of fundraising, again, which also serves as your fundraising platform and integrates with your website, usually very seamlessly. People can't tell the difference between the two. Check out these tools, Give Smart, Galabid, depending, again, do you have some kind of an auction or a bidding component to your day? Are you doing a paddle raise? Do you need more flexibility and functionality than you may get from a Classy by adding on some kind of a bidding or a text to give component to it. But I keep talking about Classy because I like them and I think their platform is simple, but they're all very similar, and these are paid these are paid tools. Unlike the live streaming, you will pay something, likely a percentage of the gift that you get via these tools. You must read the fine print. They all have some kind of a different deal and offer different functionality. So check them out depending on what you're trying to achieve. And then I do recommend, again, that you give constant or frequent opportunities, especially if you're doing a live event, frequent opportunities for your donors to make a gift. They may have already made a gift, but if you offer them, if you do a live paddle raise or some sort of a text to bid that evening or that day, they may give again. In fact, they're likely to give again. They're just likely not to give as large of a gift as they would have if I solicited them Zoom to Zoom, face to face. So these are the fundraising platforms that I want you to consider. And again, if you're doing a live event, you need both the live streaming and some sort of fundraising platform that integrates with your website. Speaking of website, what is it? Do you have someone on your team who is able to serve as project manager or project coordinator to integrate your fundraising platform with your website? Maybe you're putting it right on your website. Great. What do you need? What kinds of communications do you need to consider in order to put on this live event? You generally want to save the date. You are certainly sending out an invitation, a way for people to sign up. Are you still doing a hard copy invitation, a snail mail invitation? Some of us are, and some of us have reverted back to that because in the world of email, things get lost in the inbox. So for this event that we're helping with on June 25th, they did both. They certainly sent out an electronic invitation and sign up, and they had some older members of their segment of their donor base that they felt maybe would not be able to access as easily those kinds of opportunities. And so it was not a one size fits all. They also sent out a snail mail invitation to these people. Again, this was sort of a 60-ish and above age group that was used to getting a hard copy invitation. And so they still sent out that invitation, giving explicit instructions how to get on to this virtual event, like sort of a Zoom tutorial kind of situation. So think about that. Most of the time, if you're using some kind of a constant contact or e-communication platform, you have the opportunity with an Eventbrite to send event reminders, event follow-up, and link the work that you're doing online to your social media accounts. Make it very easy for people to go back and forth and click. This all goes into a communications plan or some kind of an editorial calendar to support the event. So who's doing that posting? How do people find out? Are we covering all our bases and all our different markets? People interface with your school, your college in lots of different ways, and we want to appeal to all of them. Any questions? Okay, we're good?
Yeah, just request for additional information to be sent, and I'll send you an email with all of this.
Good. Okay, so this is my last slide, and then I'm going to try and take you back. If we don't have a lot of questions, I'm going to take you back to some examples. But I do want to spend just a minute on thinking about your case for support, because although we're talking about the logistics and the people part of putting on a virtual event, I think for many of us, the case for support, the reason to give, has shifted and changed over. Your core mission is still your core mission. But if we're not linking our campaign messaging to what's going on in the world right now, I think we're missing an opportunity. So what is it that the school is experiencing right now that maybe it wasn't experiencing last year? And my guess is that a lot of us are worried about, again, being able to offer the kind of financial aid that students may need and want in order to come back to school or come to school for the first time in the fall. We also are I know many universities and colleges are announcing significant cuts. So we need fundraising maybe more than we ever did to help fill that gap. And I think that you really want to think about how we reposition our case and talk to donors about what we're experiencing right now and how they can be our partner. So again, our case will build on that. I'm not saying you're rewriting the script completely, because you have to build on that typical case for operating support, but it must be compelling. It must feel urgent. I don't want you to manufacture anything, but I do want to point out here where I say tell stories and make it real. 86% of the top 3% of households by wealth give to meet critical needs. What is critical about your campaign? What do you need people to know about what the institution needs in order to continue offering an excellent education to your students? That is what must come across. And if you don't, we talked about sort of feeling or sounding or worrying about sounding tone deaf. If you're not reflecting on what's happening in the world, and there's a lot happening in the world right now, if your case does not reflect that, if you're not talking about what you're doing for your students and with your students to help them confront and meet their concerns and their needs, both from a social justice perspective and from an economic perspective, then you may be missing the boat. And so really be looking at your case for support and saying, what needs to change? What are we doing differently? How will the fact that we must offer an education in a different way than we ever have before, how does that influence our ask and what our messaging is to our donors? So please, and by the way, focus it on, what I mean by focus on the donor is the hero. I know it's tempting for us to make the student the hero, or make the university the hero. It's not how it works in fundraising. The donor is the hero. How do we position the donor in our messaging as the key to helping us make all of these wonderful things happen? So what is it that, and this goes back to that top conversation about your top 30 donors and prospects. What is it that we know about them? The people who give at the most significant level, or may not even be your highest donors, but it may be your most consistent, those with longevity with your institution. What do we know about them? What is important to them? How do we appeal to that and position them at the heart of what is going on right now, and then ask them to partner with us? Here's what I know about what's important to you. You've been making a gift to this school for 23 years. And what we know about you is that you care so much about giving students an opportunity to have a high quality education, regardless of financial situation. And so because that's important to you, I'm asking you to partner with us to address these challenges that I've just laid out for you. Here's what's important to you. We are in a position to respond to that. Let's get together and partner and meet those challenges. That's the ask right now. And it has to feel urgent, it has to feel real, and it has to reflect on what's going on in the world. So I would ask you, before you take steps to be thinking about your virtual event, to really think about messaging and your case for support right now. Because if you have not taken time to rewrite it, I'm guessing now is the time. Now is the time. Okay, so any other questions? Yeah.
Just about 3 more minutes. So
yeah. Okay, so with my last 3 minutes, I want to see if I can take you. If this doesn't work, I might have to stop share and start share again. Okay, I want to show you a couple of websites. Can you see my, can you see anything right now or no?
We can just see your deck, your slide.
Oh, you can only see the slide. Okay, so I think I have to stop share. And let me start share again. And while I'm doing this, any other comments or questions? Can you see my?
Yes, we can see.
So this is Build's virtual gala. And you can see that they did, keep referring to either like a series of events or an event. They did a series of events over the course of a week. So here, I just wanted to share this with you. And again, I'll include my presentation with all of these live links. I have live links to what Classy is doing, the kinds of organizations, some with team captains. I'm just gonna show you this one. And don't get nervous or scared by like, really, I have to do 7 days of events? You don't have to. But I thought that this was a nice example of sort of a gala kickoff. And then they had a series of speakers. You could do this with students. You could do this with professors, faculty members who are each offering something to your donor community during a specific week. I don't want to create you know, something huge and hard to handle for you, but I do want you to be thinking about what you have to offer. And this is just an example of an organization that said, we're going to do a week of programming. And certainly there was one day during every single one of these days of programming, there was an opportunity to give. So if you're not interested in this, maybe you're interested in this, and this is how you're going to interface with the organization. They did do a silent auction. They always had an opportunity to make a donation. A lot of information here, again, on each of these days, but I wanted you to get a sense of what's possible. I also want you to be sure to be very front and center with thanking your sponsors, whether those are people or institutions, opportunity to do that right on their website. And again, you would have no way of knowing if this is, and certainly featuring the work, and they did some videos in addition to their live speakers, you'd have no way of knowing, is this their website or is this their live streaming or their fundraising platform? That's how it integrates. That's how most of these companies are doing this. I see we're at 1 minute left, so I'm going to stop my share. Again, I will send these so that you have these links, and I can also send them to in a follow-up email so that you can take a look at these. Please feel free. Actually, I'll just share my PowerPoint one more time just so that you have my contact information up on the screen. Here's my email, here's my phone, here's my website. If you have questions, we're offering 30-minute complimentary coaching sessions for anyone who attends our webinars. So I'm happy to speak to you more specifically about your own challenges. I'm also happy to share with you some of the resources that I mentioned or anything else that you might be looking for. Please feel free to reach out and email me, and we can start a conversation. Thanks, everybody. I appreciate you sharing your morning.
Thanks so much, Amy.
Good luck with the rest of the conference.
Thank you. Thank you. And thank you again for presenting. I'm pretty sure you'll have a ton of emails after this. And I'll send over any information that was left in the chat box that you may not have seen.
Great. Appreciate it.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Take care.
Thanks, all.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.